Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is a garden question and answer video. This is actually a bonus one midweek. We're getting a lot of questions this time of year, and you can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video. I think I had 20 in Sunday's question and answer video. If you haven't watched that one, it was like 52 minutes long or something. I've got only 10 questions in this one, so this one should be about half as long. So stick around. I think they're pretty good questions that we had just extra questions from the other day, where I didn't want to necessarily make an hour-and-a-half video the other day, but maybe a couple times this spring we'll have these midweek ones just to cover some additional questions as the gardens are waking up and the soil temperature's coming up and things are starting to come back to life a little bit. One of the questions I got from last week from the other day was, what kind of palm is this behind you? This is a windmill palm, but specifically it's one from some seedlings that were from a palm from Greensboro, North Carolina that survived a very, very cold temperature. So we have, and I was down in Florida with a palm grower a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling him he should acquire some of these. This is a known strain of windmill palms that are incredibly cold hardy. So it's kind of strange. This Stella Ruby Magnolia here has some burn on the outside of it and a little bit of damage, not severe, but a little bit. The Laura Petalum right here has a little bit of burn on it, but that palm, nothing. You know, it's had snow on it twice, and it's actually grown a lot this winter. I mean, really has grown a lot this winter. So it's a trunking palm, and it takes a long time for it to really start trunking, but now it has. I think within a couple seasons we'll see it up here at the top of the corner of the porch now. Once it gets the engine going, they're pretty fast growing, but it takes a few years initially for them to transition into the ground. So I've answered a question before I got to the questions. Again, the weekly garden planner is $50 off. If you don't own the weekly garden planner, it is a week by week what to do in the garden. We also have a video at the beginning of it just to kind of tell you how to adjust it to your area from my area here in Raleigh. And about 2 more weeks, it's going to be $50 off, and adding more and more things to it as time goes on, just to make sure that it's up to date. And we just recorded it over the last year, and as I come back around to March again, I look at it, I go, oh, we're doing this in the garden, but I didn't include it in the weekly garden planner, so we're making sure that, that we're covering everything over time. So we'll continue to add to it year over year. Making a lot of progress here in the garden, and in fact, yesterday really went through the front garden and gave it a once over. The video that will have gone up before this was me putting some compost out there, but after that was over, we actually just got out there and cleaned everything up. It's really, the front garden looks a whole lot better. I'm gonna do the same thing in the back garden today. We're a little dry. If you look at the US drought monitor, there's a lot of the country right now that's in some sort of form of drought, and it's been an interesting winter where we've gotten some rain here or there, but overall, it is definitely, we definitely should have gotten more. And so it's going to be interesting going into spring. I hope everybody finds some, we get some consistent rain moving across the eastern part of the country here in the next few weeks, because we actually need it. I think the Mississippi Valley is about the only place that's not. The Mississippi Valley and the Pacific Northwest, I think, are the only 2 places in the entire country that aren't under some sort of mild drought or severe drought. Kind of interesting. Have a couple, as this video is going up, I think next Monday I'm speaking at the Charlotte Garden Club, and then a couple weekends after that down at the Gardens of Southeastern North Carolina. You can go on the Gardens of Southeastern North Carolina's website and buy a ticket to that, and I don't remember right now how much the tickets are, but there's several speakers that morning, including somebody from Espoma, and I think David is speaking, the owner of Johnson Nursery, and me, and I think the head gardener for the actual botanic garden is speaking. Okay, I think that's what I needed to talk about on that. And we have 11 questions, 12 if you count the palm over here. Okay, so somebody watched us plant the baby blue ice cypress in the front garden in a video. Why did we not add amendments like pine bark fines when we planted it? Okay, so if I had just pure clay out here and this was new construction and I was just jumping in and I wanted to get some plants in the ground, I would have dug the hole in the clay, and then I would have used some pine fines, which not everybody in the country can get. So I don't talk about it as much as I used to, just because if I talk about fine ground pine bark, only a certain area of the country in the southeast can usually find it in the stores. It's just the bark of a pine tree. The pine itself is used for lumber and other things, of course, and then for wood pellets, for fires and all kinds of things. But the bark is typically a byproduct of that and is used for growing almost every plant that you guys buy in a 3-gallon pot and pull it out. That bark that's in there is pine bark as a byproduct of growing these pines, in farms basically, and using them for construction. So if I had brand new construction and it was just pure clay soil, two birds just, I don't know if you guys saw that. I don't know if that's they were there long enough. They just flew right by me. 2 robins chasing each other. He is chasing her, I guess. This is that time of year. But I would have probably mixed in some pine bark and talked about it, but we amended this soil up front. And so I talk a lot about recreating the forest floor. It's what my talk on Monday night is going to be at Charlotte Garden Club, is about soil. I call it soil first gardening. We basically jumped in here and we did this. We put down some compost and we put down some wood chips. You could skip the compost and just do wood chips, but it takes a little while longer for the engine to get going that way. But having done that, now when I pull the mulch back, the chunkier material that's on the top, when I pull that back and then dig that hole, that humus layer that I've created from compost and the wood chips breaking down and the mulch, the decorative mulch I've used for 4 years, that material is getting mixed into the soil. The other thing is, and I will say, you don't necessarily have to amend the soil. For lots of us, this clay soil actually has everything these plants need. The issue with it is, number one, it's very hard for us as humans to dig in it, and we just can't mentally wrap our head around that soil actually being good for anything because it's so hard to work with. But it is good for the plants. It's high in iron. A lot of these are iron. A lot of these plants are that we use in our ornamental gardens like acidic soil, and they like iron. They're heavy iron feeders, and so that combination is good. We just need to plant them up a little higher. So you don't necessarily have to amend it, period. So I need to say this occasionally because I think sometimes we have a tendency to more overdo the amending than underdoing the amending. You don't need to dump a $10 bag of anything in the soil to make a plant grow. Typically, if it's in clay, you need to mount it up some so it sits up above that. Gets the fact that soil may not drain as well. And it just keeps the collar of that plant out of that. The neck of that plant from being just drowning in it basically when we go through seasonal rain changes. But other than that, it's not that bad. But what we did here again was we rebuilt if you think about the forest floor, and I've talked about this a few times, you have this chunky material on top, the limbs and sticks and pine cones and whatever else, probably dead animals and everything else that's on top. And then as you go down in layers, you go through this humus layer that's compost basically. And then you'll go to a topsoil layer, and then you'll hit whatever that kind of actual soil is in that area, whether it be sand or clay or loam or whatever it is, and then you'll get down to some rockier and eventually reach rock, right? But those layers, we're just trying to reduplicate those in our garden and rebuild basically a topsoil layer that the builder took away when they built your house. They scraped that topsoil. When they tore the woods down or scraped the farm or whatever the heck your subdivision was before it was your subdivision, they scraped all that off and just left you with kind of that subsoil, that soil that was down below the topsoil. But if you can build a humus and chunky layer on top of that, earthworms will start to earthworms and beetles and other larger things in the soil, and even the birds digging and the squirrels digging and all those kinds of things, they'll start to recreate this topsoil layer, this layer that's in between the humus and that subsoil, that clay or sand or whatever it is. That's the layer that we want to recreate without dumping topsoil that you buy from somewhere that could have all kinds of issues. We would like to rebuild it in our own garden. So answering this in a long way, but if you amend the soil up front, My thing is, if you amend the soil up front, you don't need to amend it as you plant plants, okay? If you're just going out there and putting a bunch of plants in a new scraped, lot that's been recently graded, then you probably do want to amend it a little bit. And pine bark soil conditioner is a great way to do that, or some sort of compost. You don't 100% have to though. Okay, all right. Somebody asked, how do plants sense the change in soil temperature to signal growth? What else switches on plant growth in the spring? Well, obviously day length. So a lot of plants just go based on day length. As these days are getting longer, they know, to switch on. The one issue that plants have is false springs. And so what they don't want to do is flower too early and then get stung. So a lot of the Asian plants we bring here, unfortunately, they're sensing something different and getting out a little bit too early ahead of our potential last frost, or they're from some area where they don't typically get late frost. So this Loropetalum is an example of that. It's absolutely covered in flower buds back here. It's going to flower next week in full flower. All of them are, and we've got another 3 weeks before that we could get frost or freezes on that could damage those flowers. So they're out a little bit early. They're out of sync because they're not from here. They didn't evolve here. Most of the things that would have evolved here, the spring ephemerals come up super early. So I showed the American bloodroot we have over there on the side. We have mayapple back here. Those things do come up super early because they want to beat that spring growth. They're doing something completely different where they're trying to come up a month before everything else does. Trilliums are an example of this, because they're going to get up, bloom, and then get the heck out of the way before all the spring stuff, they will have already bloomed basically. So there's some stuff that's trying to get ahead of other things, and other things that are smart enough to wait until it's actually warm enough to go. But they have proteins in their roots, so they sense the temperature change with proteins, and then from there start to basically change the structure, within the plant to go from their winter mode where there's not a lot of liquid up in the top of the plant, to their spring mode where they start pumping things up there so they can get ready to grow. But so they can sense temperature change. Some of them are sensing temperature change in the soil, others day length, others just the overall warmth. Some plants are from places where they just don't get severe winter at all, and but they'll tolerate winter, but they're not actually used to winter, and those plants have a hard time turning on and off. They'll just turn back on. If you get 70 degrees for a week in January, they'll turn themselves back on and then have to go back to sleep again. Well, they don't go to sleep. They just go through modified, shock and awe, I guess we'll call that. But it's interesting. It's super interesting. Every plant has a different way to wake up and a different strategy to compete with the things that are there. Our native plants obviously have strategies that are very much based on the Southeast United States, if I'm calling native everything from, in the Southeast. And the plants where you're from, have strategies based on that. Because we're playing chess, basically with these plants all across the globe, moving them around, a lot of them end up in places where they have a hard time figuring out how to wake up properly without being damaged. Okay. Somebody said our blueberries look great. What varieties? We have several varieties over there. We have 4 varieties from the Southern Living Plant Collection, but the 2 that I showed off in the video the other day that are about to flower are Bless Your Heart and Takes the Cake. They're 2 rabbit eye blueberries. Rabbit eye blueberries are kind of, with blueberries, you want to get ones that match your chill hours in your area. You can look this up. You can see how many chill hours. I can Google how many chill hours does Raleigh, North Carolina get, and I'm probably going to get something between 400 and 700 or something like that. And we need to match blueberries to that, because blueberries, we do need them to stay asleep for a certain amount of time. We need, you have low chill blueberries like Southern High Bush varieties. We have a couple Southern High Bush varieties over here. they need very low chill hours, so only between like 200 and 400, and then the rabbit eyes need between like 400 and 700. I'm very much generalizing here because it's probably a slightly wider band than that. And then you have northern high bush varieties that require more chill hours and they stay asleep longer so they don't wake up. If I put the southern high bush varieties up in New York, they would wake up as soon as it hit 70 degrees one day. They'd wake up and then they'd be in for another 2 months of winter after that. So you need to have your blueberries for the area that you live in. Should be pretty easy to find out if you Google how many chill hours you have and then match that type of blueberry to that. Then those are the varieties you need to match to your area to make sure they don't wake up way too early. Let's see. Somebody said, can you use hedge clippers to cut your panicle hydrangeas? Because they have like 20, and they usually do finer pruning with hand pruners and lobsters, lobsters, it's funny, with loppers, but they have too many and need to just get it done. Yeah, you can go across them with hedge clippers. Keep in mind that, I was noticing on my moon dance hydrangea where I just cut it with the hedge clippers last year, the areas where I left wood above the next bud on the stem have some dieback in them. And that is an entry point for disease. It's not a plant that typically gets many problems, but if you did introduce that into a plant that did get potential issues, that was more susceptible to those types of issues, like if you went out and cut your Daphne like that, or cut your maybe gardenias like that, or anything, really rough like that, you may introduce some sort of pathogen. I don't think you will on a panicle hydrangea because they typically don't have many issues in our gardens. But again, you'll notice if you cut something, 3 inches above, I'm trying to look on a butterfly bush over here where it got cut like that. It's better to hand prune those things when you're pruning because you can get closer, just above the buds and leave less of that little nub above that. But if you have 20 of them, I'm not going to worry about it with panicle hydrangeas, off with their heads. Let's see. It's not best practices, but it's not terrible on that particular plant. Let's call it that. Somebody has some 5-year-old sunshine ligustrum that have dropped their leaves. Never happened before. They're well planted, whatever. It's normal. They're going to flush right back out. So you'll notice even on the Chinese privet that are in the woods that this year, I see all the Chinese privet have lost their leaves right now. And some years they do so more than others. But this year they just went completely deciduous. Basically, you're looking at a plant that's kind of, let's call it tardily deciduous. Okay, these are plants that seem evergreen, but what happens in the spring is the new leaves push off the old leaves. Okay, so they're actually deciduous, but they kept the leaves through the winter and made you think that they were evergreen, okay? Those privet kind of fall into that category of tardily deciduous. So they're going to shed a lot of leaves, but typically they wait until the new leaves are forming on it, and so you barely even knew that was going on. But there are, and I don't know the answer to this. I've tried to figure it out, but I noticed the Chinese privet, the invasive ones, the sunshine ligustrum doesn't flower, but the invasive Chinese privet that are out there are all deciduous this year, and some years they aren't. So I don't know. You would say it's severe winter because we had a little bit more winter this year, that maybe winter did it, but that's not, I don't think that's ever been the pattern. I have no idea what the pattern is, that every few years they seem to just drop every leaf and re-leaf out. So that's what's happening. They'll just leaf right back out. It's not that big of a deal. If the mulch and leaves and all that stuff underneath them, maybe a good time to go in there and clean them up underneath a little bit and remulch them with a light, so that stuff's not piled up in there, because they do drop leaves consistently. Azaleas do the same thing. I told somebody in a consultation the other day that was going to reset prune their azaleas that while you're in there, while you have them cut down, I would get all those old leaves and everything that's piled up and accumulated in that azalea over the years, and then remulch it lightly. But you'll notice that all that debris builds up in the bottom of them because azaleas just lose leaves constantly. They're evergreen, but they're dropping leaves down in the center of the plant constantly. Plus other things, of course, are blowing in there and getting trapped. And so when you reset prune something, it's a good idea, or when you can get into it, to clean them up a bit where they're kind of over mulched, and then remulch them lightly. You can use some of the same material, just make sure it's not this deep down in the middle of the plant. Okay, that's number 5. Somebody has a weeping Japanese maple growing over a metal stake, which is near a forked junction. So basically this thing was on a metal stake and a limb went over the top of this metal stake and weeped down. So now the metal stake is stuck up into the tree a bit. It's a 3/4 inch branch. Should they cut the branch off the top of it or try to manipulate that metal stake out of the ground? I think there's a third option, which is to cut the metal stake. So for me, I would probably attempt to cut the metal stake without hurting the tree, and then pull the metal stake out the bottom. So don't try to pull the metal stake up and hurt the tree, or cut the giant limb if you can. I would want to cut the stake and then take the stake out as a 2-part piece, and see if that will see if you can get it out that way without, because that's probably the least overall amount of damage to the plant. It takes a long time to grow back a big 3/4 inch piece of Japanese maple that if you stand back and go, well, it can survive without that and it still look pretty good, then cut it and then be done with it. But if you stand back and go, wow, that's a major part of that tree, I'd really like to save it, then I would cut the stake if you can. You may have to do it by hand, so that you don't hurt it. Let's see, number 7. This person moved to the Piedmont of North Carolina. The Piedmont's kind of the central part of North Carolina. It goes up into Virginia and then kind of curves down through Georgia and over to Alabama. It's just basically the clay piece between the Appalachian Mountains and the Sand Hills, which start just a little bit east of us, where the ocean has been in the past, is not that far from us. Let's see. They have a hydrangea, but they can't tell which it is. So how will they know about pruning? It still has spent blooms on it. Well, so all of them still have spent blooms on them from last year. The oak leaf hydrangeas and the mountain hydrangeas and the hydrangea paniculatas and the hydrangea macrophylla, all of them have their spent flowers on them from last year. So that's not really going to be a great indicator. So you can just prune anything after it flowers. And one of the things I added to the weekly garden planner, I said this a couple times now, it's pruning times on different things. So I have the 5 main hydrangeas on there, including climbing hydrangea, on the pruning time on there, on the weekly garden planner now. But you can forget about that and actually just prune after flowering if you want to on anything. So what my suggestion to you would be, wait till it wakes up and blooms, and then if you need to prune it after it flowers at that point. And by that point, you can use one of the plant ID apps on your phone, and you can identify it from later in the season. I do have a video, if you search HortTube and hydrangea on YouTube, you're going to find a lot of videos. So I have a video on like the 5 major hydrangea types. I've got a video on when to prune each of them. Maybe from that, as they're leafing out in the spring, you can see from my video which one you have, or again, you can just get one of the plant ID apps once it's waking up and see what kind of hydrangea you have. And then some of them again can be pruned right now, like the paniculatas, and some of them can be you need to wait till after, but you can wait on all of them until after. So that's not a problem. And just give them a chance to wake up, and then you can identify them. Somebody asked if wood chips will work on a slope. Probably depends on how much of a slope. So this is the nice thing about wood chips. So I'm on a wood chip path right now. These wood chips, I think you can see this, they're all different sizes, right? The chipper doesn't chip them all the same. And so this has a little bit of pine straw in it because it was a pine tree. If you would have some small wispy limbs in it if it was an oak, but you'll get small little wispy limbs, chunky material. And as I'm looking down, there's much more chunky material than this. And then, there's part of the bark of the tree. That's actually a pine cone from that pine tree. So you'll get all parts of it. When you have different size, and this is how chunky the material can get, right? Even more than that. When you have different size and shape material, that's the best material to put on a slope, okay? It's things that will lock together. If you put that pallet mulch It's part of my presentation for Monday night as well, is about this pallet mulch that you see everywhere now. A lot of these bagged mulch is just chipped up pallet material or byproduct from lumber industry. You can tell it's a very different look than the bark mulches that are out there. That stuff just floats like crazy. Everywhere I see it, it's washed out in the sidewalks and everywhere. So that stuff I'm definitely not using. It's been dry. I think it's been kiln dried, or it's been aged as they were waiting for the lumber to dry some before they milled it. And because it's been dried out some, it's actually very light, which for them, think about this, bagging it and shipping it is gonna cost a lot less because it's been dried out some. And then they're dyeing it brown or red or black or whatever. That material though, it floats like crazy. Everywhere I see it, tends to be a mess. The hardwood mulch that I use to mulch the beds out here has a little bit of wood and a little bit of bark and a little bit of fibery product, material in it, and it locks down because of that. So that's the kind of, what you want to look for a material. Pine straw will work too. Pine straw locks in on itself as well. But you want to use a material that has different sized pieces and different shaped pieces in it. That's the kind of material that's going to lock down. Of course, if the slope's like this, that's not going to work, right? But if it's a mild slope, the wood chips will hold on it. I was in a consultation with someone who has an event center, basically, where they host weddings and that kind of thing. And he has a big slope space going around it, and he had wood chips on it. Well, it was a pretty decent slope, and they looked like they were holding in place great. If it gets a week or 2 or 3 without a super, super heavy rain, it does kind of form a little bit of a crust, and that'll get it settled in and keep it up on the slope. But it is hard to figure out what to use sometimes. But material that has different shapes and sizes tends to hold together better. Okay, this person said, while she was 9 months pregnant, she planted 2 button bushes on the edge of the pond. Didn't realize they were in a drought, that the pond was actually low. And so now the plants are below the water level. Should they try to move them, or could they be adjusting? Or are they likely to die? So they're dead already if they're gonna die. The button bush will grow in water. I've said this before, that there are a lot of plants that are actually capable of making 2 different kinds of roots. You can have roots in water if you take a coleus cutting or something like that during the summer in your garden, and you take it inside and you put it in the water and you root it out in the water. Believe it or not, those roots are very different than the roots that plant would have produced if it had rooted in the soil. The roots that it roots into the water are capable of getting what it needs out of the water, and the roots that go in soil are capable of getting what it needs out of soil. And when you grow a button bush, which is perfectly capable of, again, I've seen it literally growing in the water, and Itea and a bunch of our native shrubs, Clethra, is capable of growing in the water. The roots that they're producing are different roots. So if you buy one in a container, you buy a plant in a container and you go stick it in the water, sometimes it'll die, and you'll go, well, why? I know that plant grows in the water, why won't it grow in the water? It didn't have water roots, so it has to re-root. So there's some possibility that it pushed new roots out in there, and it can survive this. Hopefully the pond drops at some point though, because I don't think it wants to sit in water year round like that. It's either dead already, or it's adapted. There's no in between here. Once it sat in water for any length of time, the roots that were on it from the container almost certainly died. And then whether or not it was capable of pushing new roots into that soil and saving itself, I don't know. So it's one or the other, and it's already happened. So that's where that is. Hopefully I explained that okay. Somebody has their Veronica had a tough winter. They're an 8A in the triad. They cut back the dead stems, but not sure if they're still alive. Veronica should die down to the ground, and so that's normal. They should come back from the roots. Everything is a little bit slower. Not everything, but a lot of things are definitely slower this year. So I would give them a few weeks before you made a decision. Any kind of decision on them, because I don't know if they're still alive or not. But we're seeing perennials pop up in the last few days. perennials that we were kind of questioning because they went to sleep kind of ugly. I mean, a lot of things just got slammed in November because they hadn't gone to sleep. We're seeing them start to wake up. So I think that more things are alive than you think. Then they threw in, do we know of stronger Veronica that can survive the ups and downs of our winter? So we did a video up with Richard Hawkey at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And Richard, the reason we had gone up there was because he does the plant trialing at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And we wanted to, I had met him several times over the years, and then we went up and did that video, and it was, it's a pretty cool video on plant trialing, but he did a Veronica trial. So you can, if you go to the Chicago Botanic Garden and look up the Veronica trial, you can see all the ones that were the best. So they do he kind of everybody now does their trialing based on his trialing at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Used to be with plant trialing, you might plant them in a spring and let them go a year and then say, oh, it did great. It's a great plant for us, or it was a poor plant for us, or whatever. He went to a 3-year trialing at the Chicago Botanic Garden because over 3 years, you're going to see extreme winter in Chicago and you're going to see an extreme summer in Chicago in all likelihood. So he extended the period of time with which trialing is done. So pretty much everybody now, I think, has kind of copied his trialing technique, whatever they're trialing. So, but anyway, the Veronica trial from that garden has the list of the best ones from basically planting them in the ground and leaving them 3 years in a very tough environment in the middle of a field. Let's see. I get this one all the time. Is ash good for the soil? So wood ash. And whether this is coffee grounds or any of the other things, yes, it's good for the soil, but you need to spread this stuff out far and wide. This is my point is that wood ash, you know, has calcium and magnesium and phosphorus and potassium potentially in it, and, you know, maybe in concentrations that you wouldn't want to dump into one spot. And so if you have ash and things like that, yes, absolutely, spread it out on the garden, but spread those things out far and wide so you're not concentrating them in one spot. If you concentrate them in one spot over time, you're going to end up with too much magnesium or too much calcium or too much phosphorus or something in that spot. So no matter what it is you're throwing out in the garden, spread it out far and wide, and that way you're not concentrating a nutrient that could potentially cause problems in the future. Okay, that was 11, 12 if you call, if we say the palm was a question as well, which it was. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for following along with the channel, asking great questions. Continue to ask questions down in the comments section. We'll pick from those each Sunday typically. And usually those videos have about 20 to 25 questions in them, something like that. And don't forget the weekly garden planner is $50 off for another, 2.5 weeks from now. And thank you guys for watching.